3 true horror stories that still don't have explanations. The first story was shared by someone who says that even now, years later, they still don't know whether what they experienced was something supernatural, something human, or something their mind simply refuses to fully process. It happened when I was in my mid-20s. I had just moved into a small rental house on the edge of a quiet town. The place wasn't old or rundown, just plain. One-story, beige siding, a small backyard bordered by trees. During the day, it felt normal. At night, it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The first few weeks passed without incident. I settled into a routine work during the day, dinner, TV, bed. One night, a little after midnight, I woke up suddenly with the strong feeling that someone was standing in my bedroom. My eyes snapped open, heart racing, but the room was dark and empty. I lay there listening, straining to hear anything at all. That's when I noticed the sound. It was faint, almost too quiet to register at first. A low humming noise coming from somewhere in the house. It wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't music. It sounded more like someone humming under their breath, steady and slow. I sat up in bed, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. The sound seemed to drift, like it was moving from room to room. I told myself it was probably a neighbor, maybe sound carrying through the walls, even though the nearest house was a good distance away. The humming stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt heavy, pressing down on me. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was overreacting. Just as I started to relax, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. They were slow, careful. Each step creaked the floorboards in a way that made it clear this wasn't just the house settling. Someone or something was walking back and forth outside my door. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the hallway. It was empty. The footsteps stopped the moment the light came on. I stayed awake the rest of the night, too scared to sleep. The next morning, I searched the house. Every door was locked. Every window was closed. Nothing was out of place. I told myself it had been a vivid half-dream and tried to move on. But it didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, it happened several more times. Always after midnight, the humming, the footsteps. Sometimes I would hear what sounded like someone standing directly outside my bedroom door, breathing softly. Every time I checked, there was nothing there. One night I finally worked up the courage to open the door while the footsteps were happening. The moment I turned the knob, the sound stopped. The hallway was empty, but the air felt colder, heavier, like something had just been there and slipped away. I moved out less than a month later. I never found an explanation. No break-ins, no animals, no logical source for the sounds. Whatever was in that house only made itself known when I was alone and only after midnight. And to this day, I don't know what it wanted. The second story comes from someone who experienced something while driving late at night that still doesn't make sense, no matter how many times they replay it in their head. I was driving home from a friend's house after midnight, taking a back road to avoid highway construction. It was a route I'd driven dozens of times before. The road cut through a wooded area with no streetlights, just long stretches of darkness broken by occasional reflective signs. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights behind me. That wasn't unusual, but what stood out was how far back they stayed. They matched my speed perfectly, never gaining, never falling behind. I tried slowing down slightly. They slowed too. I sped up. They sped up. After a while, I started to feel uneasy. I glanced in the rearview mirror again and noticed something strange. The headlights didn't look like they were attached to a normal car. They were too far apart and slightly uneven. I told myself it was just the angle or maybe a truck. Then the headlights disappeared. 1 second they were there, the next complete darkness behind me. I checked my mirrors, expecting to see them turning off onto a side road, but there were no intersections. No driveways, just trees. A few minutes later, the headlights reappeared, this time much closer. My heart started pounding. There was no way the vehicle could have closed that distance so quickly without me seeing it. The light stayed right on my bumper, so close I could barely see anything else behind me. Suddenly, the headlights turned off. Not faded, not dimmed. Just gone. I slowed down, scanning the road, my pulse hammering in my ears. That's when I noticed something ahead. A figure standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by my headlights. I slammed on the brakes. The figure didn't move. It stood there, perfectly still, facing away from me. It looked human tall, thin, but something about it felt off. The proportions didn't look quite right. I honked my horn, expecting it to react. It didn't. As I sat there frozen, the headlights behind me turned back on. I was boxed in. Whatever was behind me was close again, and the figure ahead still hadn't moved. Panic took over. I swerved off the road, barely missing the figure, and floored it back onto the pavement. As I passed, I turned my head to look. There was nothing there. No figure. No sign that anyone had been standing in the road at all. I looked in my mirror again. The headlights behind me were gone too. I drove the rest of the way home shaking, checking my mirrors constantly. I went back during the day to look for skid marks or any sign of what happened. There was nothing. No footprints, no marks, no explanation. To this day, I don't know what I almost hit or what had been following me. The final story was sent in by someone who experienced something inside their own home that still defies explanation, even after police involvement. I lived alone in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an older building. The place had thin walls and creaky floors, so hearing noises wasn't unusual. Still, I was careful. I always locked my door and double-checked the windows before bed. One night, just after midnight, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard my front door unlock. The sound was unmistakable. The click of the lock turning, followed by the soft creak of the door opening. I froze, staring at the hallway. I knew I had locked it. I always did. The door opened a few inches and stopped. I waited, barely breathing, expecting someone to step inside. No one did. After a few seconds, the door slowly closed again. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, walking cautiously toward the door. It was closed, locked, just like I had left it. I told myself maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the TV had made a similar sound. I went back to the couch, but my nerves were shot. I turned the TV off and sat in silence. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the apartment above me. That wasn't unusual either, until I realized the unit above mine was vacant. It had been empty for months. The footsteps moved back and forth, heavy enough to be clearly heard. Then something else joined them. A dragging sound, like furniture being moved across the floor. I stood up, heart racing, and listened. The sounds continued for several minutes, then stopped suddenly. I was about to sit back down when I heard a knock on my front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I stood there in the dark, staring at the door, my phone clutched in my hand. The knocking didn't happen again. The next morning, I contacted the building manager and asked if anyone had been in the apartment above mine. They told me no one had keys to it except maintenance, and no work had been scheduled. Later that night, just after midnight, it happened again. This time, the knocking was louder, more aggressive. I called the police and waited in my bedroom, door locked, lights off. By the time officers arrived, everything was silent. They checked my apartment and the one above me. Both were empty. No signs of forced entry, no explanation for the noises. I moved out shortly after. Even now, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear someone unlocking my door. Whatever caused those sounds was never identified. No one ever admitted to being there. And no explanation has ever made sense. What scares me most isn't what happened. It is that whatever it was knew exactly when I was alone, and exactly when to make itself known.